There comes a time in the life of every nation when it must ask itself whether the institutions upon which it was built still serve the cause for which they were created. When a government no longer moves, when its limbs are frozen by inaction, when its voice is drowned out by the clamor of self-interest, when its purpose has been reduced to the simple act of existing rather than governing, then the people have not only the right, but the duty to demand its reform. We stand at such a moment now. We are governed, but we are not led. We are represented, but we are not heard. We are a republic in name, but we are no longer a republic in action. It is no great revelation to say that our system is broken. That much is felt in every corner of the country, in every household that suffers under the weight of a government that cannot seem to legislate, cannot seem to compromise, cannot seem to act. It is a government that fights itself, that wages war not on poverty or injustice or decay, but on its own ability to function. And while the men and women elected to serve bicker and obstruct, the people wait. They wait for the bridges to be repaired, for the cost of medicine to be brought down, for their voices to carry weight beyond the ballot box, for the hope that their government will at last rise from its paralysis and prove itself worthy of the trust they have placed in it. This paralysis is not an accident. It is not the result of an unforeseen malfunction in our political machine. It is the direct and the predictable consequence of a system that has been allowed to serve itself rather than its people. Our government has not lost its power. It has abandoned its purpose. Those who sit in its halls and chambers have not forgotten how to legislate. They have simply chosen not to, preferring instead the comfort of endless campaigns, the safety of inaction, and the rewards of serving the powerful over the duty of serving the people. We must make no mistake. A nation that cannot govern cannot long endure. And if we wish to endure, not merely as a people, not merely as a land, but as a great and righteous force for justice, progress, and human dignity, then we must confront, without hesitation or apology, the failures that have led us to this hour. The first and most glaring of these failures is the breakdown of our legislative process. The Congress of the United States, once a beating heart of our democracy, has become a monument of inertia. Legislation that would improve the lives of millions dies before it ever reaches the floor. Essential reforms are abandoned not because they are without merit, but because they are without partisan advantage. The filibuster, once a safeguard for debate, has been transformed into a blockade against progress. Compromise, that great instrument of democratic governance, is now regarded as weakness rather than wisdom. The work of the people is not done because the people's representatives have found it more convenient to not do it. And so the roads crumble, the steel rusts, the bridges sag, and the wires that carry power to the homes of millions remain suspended upon poles that should have been replaced decades ago. The water that runs through lead-lined pipes poisons the children who drink from them. The levees that should hold firm against rising waters weaken with every passing storm. And the hospitals meant to be sanctuaries of healing are overburdened, understaffed, and crumbling beneath the weight of a system that has long since stopped investing in itself. This is the inheritance of a nation whose government has chosen not to govern. This is the reality for a people who have been promised much but delivered little, whose patience has been tested by leaders who speak in grand visions, yet leave behind only the ruins of what once was. It is not for lack of means that we suffer these indignities. It is not for lack of wealth that our roads fracture beneath our feet or our trains crawl upon tracks laid a century ago. No, it is for lack of will. It is for lack of leadership. It is for lack of a government that sees beyond the present, beyond the short-term horizon of election cycles, beyond the comfortable indifference that allows those in power to call inaction prudence, to call neglect responsibility, to call stagnation wisdom. And so we drive upon highways riddled with potholes that damage our cars and delay our journeys, as our leaders delay the repairs. We cross bridges that groan beneath the weight of time as our politicians groan at the thought of spending the money required to reinforce them. We suffer through power outages that shut down entire cities, disruptions that in other nations would be deemed catastrophic, yet here are accepted as routine, because we have been made to believe that the expectation of modernity is an unreasonable demand. There was a time when we built, there was a time when we did not simply inherit the work of our forebears, but sought to surpass them. There was a time when America laid tracks across an untamed land, when it raised towers into the sky, when it poured concrete and steel not merely to replace the old, but to bring forth the new. What happened to that nation? What happened to the ambition? When did we decide that our best days lay behind us? When did we consent to the degradation of all that was once grand? For make no mistake, consent is what they require. The people must be made to believe that they cannot demand better, that they must accept the decay, that this decline is natural, inevitable, and permanent. But this type of decline is not natural. It is not an inevitability. It is a choice, and it's a choice that has been made for us by those who will never suffer the consequences for it. It is not their roads that crack, for they do not drive upon them. It is not their water that poisons, for they drink from sources untouched by contamination. It is not their homes that flood when the dams break, or their businesses that fail when the grid collapses. Their neighborhoods that are left to crumble when investment is diverted elsewhere. The consequence of inaction do not touch them. And so they feel no urgency to act. And yet the cost of inaction is borne by all. The economy slows when goods cannot move across a failing infrastructure. Opportunities dwindle when entire communities remain disconnected from the power of modern transit. Lives are lost when the systems meant to sustain them fail at the moment they are needed the most. And through it all, the nation that once led the world in engineering, in ambition, in the unshakable belief that progress was not merely possible but necessary, finds itself slipping further behind. watching as others build what we have refused to maintain. And who benefits from this? Who prospers when nothing moves? The answer is not the American worker who loses time and wages to broken roads and untravelable transportation. It is not the small business owner when goods cannot reach markets fast enough for competition. It is not the student whose school crumbles around them, nor the parent who fears the safety of the infrastructure their children must navigate. No, the ones who benefit are those who profit from inertia. The ones who stand to gain are those who see in decay not a crisis, but an opportunity to extract, to privatize, to hold hostage the very function of government they have refused to allow to operate. For when the public sphere is left to rot, the private interests step in, not to fix, not to restore, but to sell back to the people what should have been theirs all along. The question before us today is not whether we have the resources to repair what is broken. The question is whether we have the will to demand it, whether we have the courage to reject the slow march toward decay and declare with unshakable resolve that this nation will not fall into ruin simply because those who have been left to entrust it has failed to do their duty. The time for hesitation has passed. The work of rebuilding must begin now, or we will be left with nothing but the memory of what might have been. And yet, inaction alone does not account for the full scope of our predicament. For we are not merely burdened by a government that refuses to act. We are burdened by a government that actively undermines itself. The weaponization of government shutdowns has turned our own institutions against us, transforming the simple act of funding the republic into a contest of brickmanship, where the livelihoods of federal workers, the stability of our economy, and the security of our nation are treated as a bargaining chip in an endless game of political leverage. There is no justification, none, for allowing the operations of a people's government to be halted by those who are charged with its preservation. And yet, time and time again, we see our leaders willingly, even eagerly, march us toward the cliff's edge, confident that they will not be the ones who fall. Let us be clear. A government that shuts itself down is not a government at all. It is an institution that has abdicated its most basic responsibility, a body that has chosen to surrender rather than govern. It is a monument of failure, a declaration that those who have been elected to lead have instead chosen paralysis. And yet we have been made to believe that this dysfunction is natural, that government shutdowns are an unavoidable occurrence, that they are merely the consequence of political disagreement. But there is nothing natural about a government that ceases to function. There is nothing inevitable about the manufactured crisis of a shutdown. It is a choice, one made deliberately by those who would rather wield chaos as a weapon than engage in the hard work of governing. A shutdown is not a moment of pause, not a brief interlude in the business of governance. It is an act of sabotage.